and go.
Hello, everybody. I'm Gary Buslick, and I'm here with Janna Goodwin. I'm supposed to technically interview her, but I think she's got some questions for me too, and I hope they're not too rude. Anyway, the reason we're here is because we're going to interview Janna about her new book. This is it, The End of the World Notwithstanding. I want to give you a little background of how I'm here, and then I'm going to say some prefatory stuff, and then I'm going to turn it over to Janna and give her the stage. Our publisher is the same, Traveler's Tales, and they asked me if I would do this interview because I'm from Illinois, and at first I was very reluctant. In fact, I was on the edge of telling them thanks, but no thanks. One reason is that I'm just an introvert by nature, and the other reason was that I'm a internet idiot. So I knew if something could go wrong, and it still might, with this whole thing, then it's my fault. You could blame me entirely. But then what happened was I read Janna's book, and I immediately fell in love with it. I didn't even have to read the whole thing. And one reason, not the only reason, but one reason I fell in love with it is that I teach Shakespeare at my university. I'm a Shakespeare professor at the University of Illinois at Chicago. And almost immediately with the book, it began to resonate in a very Shakespearean way for me. And the more I read, the more I saw Shakespeare in there. And then it wasn't too far into the book that I learned that indeed Janna is an actor, a playwright. She worked with the National Shakespeare Conservatory, and so I wasn't just imagining it. And on so many levels, not just Shakespearean level, but on other levels too, the book was very powerful to me in a very metaphoric way, Shakespearean way. The characters, the comedy, the tragedy, we're going to talk about all that. The philosophy, the wisdom. If anybody's familiar with Shakespeare at all, you know he was the greatest writer who ever lived. And yes, it was the man from Stratford who wrote all the great plays and sonnets. We'll talk about that later too. But his work is so powerful in terms of not just surface comedy and tragedy and so on, and philosophy and wisdom, but with the metaphoric power. And we'll talk about that too. Hemingway he coined a famous term he called it the Iceberg Theory. And what he meant was that 10% of great literature is what we read above the surface, but 90% of the power of the great literature, his included, is beneath the surface like an iceberg. And that's the metaphoric language, the language that is implied that we as humans love and appeal to us as human beings, and lives beyond the page. And what I found with Janna's book is that it did live beyond the page. And I would go to it's not a long book, it's pocket size almost, but it's powerful in a very metaphoric way so that it lives beyond the page for me. And I would be thinking about some of the things that she wrote about long after I finished the book. And I've read it 4 or 5 times. Having said that, and before I turn it over to Janna, I know she wants to read some passages from the book. And I've got a bunch of questions. I took a lot of notes too. That's what I do. It's my curse. So I'll be asking her some stuff too. And then we'll be taking questions from outsiders too. But 2 things I want to get off the table right away, clear the air about these couple things. One is chapter 3, called Fraidy Cat. We'll get into that later. She's going to read an excerpt. I read part of that to my cat.
Oh.
And I love the book, and I love that chapter, but my cat is not convinced.
You know.
So yeah, go ahead, Janna.
No, go on.
Well, she's standing by right now. And as we get into this interview, she's got an open mind, and
Okay.
especially on chapter 3, when we talk about it, she's giving you a chance. But if you hear her vomiting, then you know you didn't convince her. Okay, I want to get that clear that up.
Thank you. And
The other
wait,
thing is
what's her name? What's her name?
Babs,
Okay.
short for Barbara Katz.
I'll talk to her in a minute, but go on.
Babs, yeah. Okay, the other thing um, is there something going on between your husband and Sandra Bullock?
That's between the two of them, right? I'm not privy to
Okay,
what
well,
Sandra does or who
uh,
she does it
uh,
with.
what's your best guess? Because I'd like to, I like to get this out in the open.
I think it's more likely that it's me and Sandra in my head.
Was that right? Hmm.
Yeah, I mentioned in the book and to you that I'm a fan of her work. I like a good Sandra
You're the
Bullock
one.
movie. At the end of a long day, I like a good Sandra Bullock movie. It's like taking a warm bath. And so if there's anything between Sandra and me or my husband, it's probably between the two of us. And that's none of your business, Gary.
I'm
That's
waiting for them.
private.
I'm waiting for them to make a movie where her character dies, but they haven't done that yet. So if you happen to know about that, let me know. Will you just ring me up and I'll watch the movie.
Okay.
Okay. All right. Good.
I,
Uh,
I
no, I want to clear that up. I want to get that off the table.
thank you.
All right. So now, with that in mind, I feel better already. I'm going to turn it over to you. I know you want to read some excerpts from a few chapters, and then I've got some notes about those chapters that you're going to read from, and then we can talk about those notes of mine. Okay?
Okay, great.
So go ahead. Go ahead.
Perfect. First of all, just a note to Babs. I don't categorically dislike cats, so that's important to recognize. And also, the cat in question was really a sociopath, and it's good to keep that in mind. We have to differentiate between, not all cats are alike. So, um, I want to thank Barbara's Bookstore for having us here. I've been really excited about being here. And just a couple of words, thanks so much to Laura for setting us up, to Traveler's Tales for making this book happen, and for being so great to work with. They're just fantastic. To Kay McKinsey for all your ongoing efforts to get the word out. And Gary, you have been so generous with your time. As we've kind of gotten to know each other, and I've just been loving your book as well. So before I talk about mine, I just want to put a pin in the rotten person thing and say that I do want to come back to that. And maybe when if we talk later about the persona or the person that we put on the pages in personal narrative writing or memoir, maybe we can talk about the difference or the disconnect, if there is any, between that persona and who we maybe are in our social lives, possibly. So yeah, I guess I'll just talk a little bit about the background of the book, and then I'll go ahead and read a short excerpt from that first chapter, and we'll talk. Sound good?
That's great. I look forward to it. I got my notes.
Okay. I'm looking forward to them. So back in 2016, I put together an hour-long. I've been an actor for many years and a playwright, and I had not done a standalone comedy piece, not stand-up comedy, but a solo piece. And as I was getting older and kind of moving away from theater, I thought, well, maybe my last hurrah would be to put together a solo comedy piece. I wanted to see if I could actually hold the stage. And also just remember, an hour's worth of material. So it was kind of a test, I guess, of my abilities at that time. And I put together an hour-long comedy piece, and I called it "You Are Reminded That Your Safety is Your Own Responsibility." That title, and I'm a big fan of long titles. If you look back at my plays, they've all "The House Not Touched by Death," "If You Lived Here, You'd Be Home by Now." I like the long title. And so this came from a trip to Grand Canyon that I had just taken with my husband, Michael. at the end of a shuttle bus ride at the Grand Canyon, when you get off the bus, the driver says, "Remember, your safety is your own responsibility. Watch your step and have a great day." And that just stuck with me. It stuck with me as a thesis for my life. And I brought it back home and I started to write. Partly it was the mind bending experience of being at Grand Canyon. And I wrote that down in my journal, and that became the title of this piece that I wrote. And so it became an hour-long comedy piece of little stories about facing mortality and facing our place in the universe. And that piece was the precursor of this book, The End of the World Notwithstanding, Stories I Live to Tell. It starts out in a cabin in Wyoming, where I went immediately when we got back from this trip from Grand Canyon, just to process the canyon, I guess. And I'll go ahead and just read from the beginning of the book because it picks up from what I've just said. So I'm in the cabin and writing, and the book begins. It is a beautiful summer day. I'm traveling alone, renting a cabin at a normally tranquil spot that's called Foreshadowing on the banks of the Big Laramie River at the edge of the Medicine Bow National Forest up in Wyoming. You will not stumble upon Woods Landing on your way to someplace else because that's not where it is, and you've never been here on purpose. We'll have to rely upon my capacity to draw you into the setting using the magic of language. Imagine a veil of cottonwood, aspen, laurel, and ash, surrounded by prairie foothills and pine-covered mountainsides. My cabin is a 1-minute walk down a dirt road to a post office and a general store with a couple of gas pumps out front. The store sells regular worms, Folgers, batteries, Butterfinger bars, and bigger worms. Across the way is a cafe, saloon, dance hall that was erected according to the informative cover of the laminated cafe menu in the 1930s by a Norwegian named Håkon Lestrom. The logs, all hand-cut, perfectly fitted to cleave together without nails. The floor supported by 24 boxcar springs. When the locals come here to dance, which apparently they still do on weekends, they rebound quite a bit off that bouncy floor, which I would very much like to see. Besides that, I am up here. Why? First of all, I don't need a reason. I was born and grew up in Wyoming, and they have to let me back in whenever I want. Second, I'm on a self-styled writing retreat. My husband Michael and I just returned home from a visit to Grand Canyon that was mind-blowing and life-changing. As soon as we hit Denver and cleared out the car, I turned around and said, "Look, I have to go off again someplace on my own to think about eons and overwhelming forces and how insignificant I am. Don't watch any Sandra Bullock movies without me. I love you. Goodbye." I am checked in before noon. I unpack and install myself. T-shirts in the dresser, 6-pack in the mini fridge, cans, I'm not fancy, ukulele on the sofa, bug spray on the counter, Beyond Good and Evil on the bedside table, fishing rod by the door. In my pack are the following essentials: water, compass, gorp, and a first aid kit, Neosporin, a Q-tip, and a Band-Aid. What I lack in skill, I make up for in provisions and medical supplies. I scoot a chair to where I can watch the river roll by as I porch sit, write, and read Nietzsche, then wander over to the cafe for a bite to eat before I settle in for the week. So, why am I, a couple of hours later, standing on the porch of my cabin, totally repacked, my Fiat 500, henceforth referred to as Vern, waiting at the ready? Vern does not actually pant, but if any car could, it would be she, they, he. It's complicated. See, when he was brand new and my friend Cynthia Kolanowski first laid eyes upon his seafoam green adorability, she cried out as if encountering an old friend, "Vern!" A name spontaneously and honorably bestowed, but which for some reason I saw in my mind as having a silent feminine E at the end. It never occurred to me that Vern might not be the car's name, and that does not occur to me now. But since the christening, there has ensued no small amount of auto-gender confusion on my part. When I'm driving Vern, he's a he, I can tell. I just know it on the inside. When I introduce her, "I'd like you to meet my car, Vern, Jeremy, Vern," she is a she. Yes, I do profess to my undergraduates that gender identity is socially constructed fluid and a performance. I'm not saying I don't want any trans in my car. I do. Mission and portation. I just don't want to be futzing around looking for the right pronouns. So while I'm not going to run out and install a gun track or a gun rack or a trailer hitch to make it clear, my mind is made up. He's a he. He will be raised as a he, driven as a he, and when the day comes, sold as a he. A cute little effeminate Italian he. I'll stop there before we get to the fire.
Okay. We done with that portion?
Yes, I was going to go on to the fire, but that started to feel like quite a bit, so I thought I'd
Okay,
stop.
I'll tell you what, let's save that for a minute. I do want, if you don't mind, I'd like you to go on with that, but in the
Okay.
meantime, let's take a breather. You didn't talk about Nietzsche yet.
Oh, that's true.
But I would like you to do that, but just take a second while we're on the subject of Vern.
Yes.
Okay, and so he's, you imply that he's sort of gay. So my first question is he fabulous?
Well, I love Vern.
Yes.
Or whatever Vern wants to be, I love that.
Okay, so he is fabulous.
Yeah, I would say he's
What color is he?
fabulous.
He's green?
Green, seafoam
Okay,
green. And
which
he's
green?
adorable. I'd say more adorable than fabulous. If you've seen the Fiat 500s, they're just these tiny little compact, really super cute things.
He's petite though.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Okay,
Where are we going with this?
Well, we're going to the fact that he's Italian, right?
Yeah.
And getting back to Shakespeare, a lot of Shakespeare's plays were set in Italy. So
True.
my question to you, right? So my question to you is, was that conscious on your part to buy an Italian car, or unconscious?
I believe it was unconscious. I'm going to tell you that I'd like to say no, I bought an Italian car because of Shakespeare, Verona. No, I rented a car once and it was a Fiat 500 and I just thought this makes me feel so, I don't know, cute, lovable when I'm driving it that I wanted one. That's the whole story. I'm sorry.
Okay, so it might have been unconscious, is what you're saying. It wasn't conscious that you.
Yes.
Okay. All right, so that dovetails to my next question, which is, you mentioned your ukulele.
Yeah.
And then I think later you mentioned that you only know one song on the ukulele, right?
That's correct, yes.
All right. So my first question about the ukulele is, do you think that's a metaphor for something? Something abstract and existential?
That I only know one song on it?
Yeah. I mean, a ukulele is, let's face it, it's not a harp.
No.
Right. It's not a lyre. So I need to get to the bottom of that. Why a ukulele? And why only one song?
Oh, that's easy. The ukulele is an instrument that you can carry easily with you when you're on the road. It packs easily, it's small, it's compact. It's really easy to retune. So not only do I only know one song on the ukulele, but I've tuned it so that I don't have to really do that much with the frets. I can just kind of, only actually hit 3 frets while I'm playing. And because of the way that it's tuned, which is not traditional guitar tuning, it lets me play it quite easily. So that's the main ukulele thing, besides the fact that my best friend Kathy is a ukulele player. And at one point I fantasized that we'd be able to play together, but I never practiced. So.
And I'm not a ukulele player or a listener for that matter, but are there only 4 strings on a ukulele or 6?
Yes. Yeah, there's 4.
4?
At least on
Okay.
mine, there's only 4. Yeah, I can't claim any ukulele expertise at all. It's just that I do know this one song and I like to sing it and play it.
And which song is that?
Actually, the song appears at the very end of the book. It's a song called Before You Go, and it was originally written for a play that I wrote called The House Not Touched by Death. But it's kind of a song that sums up, I guess, my philosophy of, makes me feel good to sing it.
Was that the song you sang yesterday with Lavinia?
With Lavinia. No, it's a different one.
That
There's
was
two
Lavinia.
songs. There's two songs in the book, and this one is "We End with This."
Well, that's in the final chapter, Peaches.
Yes, that's Peaches.
Well, while you bring that up, that reminds me that you end this terrific book in verse. It is verse, and again, that reminds me of Shakespeare because most 70% of all of his plays were written in verse. So, and you're a Shakespeare person. You're an actor. Was that? Do you think how much of that do you think was a deliberate, conscious or unconscious, in
So
terms of ending it in verse?
yeah, not, but at the same time, because these lyrics came from previous pieces that I've written, and I know that verse has been important to me in my playwriting, so I've used it. I've used it frequently. So I think there probably is something to that, in that it's not necessarily written in couplets or anything, but I do think that verse carries us places that prose can't, and poetry is, you're a fan of the metaphoric, and I think that poetry verse brings us there very quickly and gives us a chance to connect. So again, unconscious, but doesn't surprise me because these were pulled from other plays, and the play from which these two songs were pulled was in fact written very consciously. It's a comedy about death and dying. It was written very consciously with a lot of verse and lyric in it. So
And then while we're on the subject of metaphor and Shakespeare, this whole chapter is about forest fire, impending doom.
yeah, do you want me to get
Forest
back
fire.
to that?
Yeah, I'd like you to get back because I want to talk about Nietzsche too.
Okay,
So go ahead.
all right. I digress, which according to our resident philosopher, Friedrich Nietzsche, is a sign of health, all that is unconditional being pathological. I am about as conditional as a person can be, which is why I'm standing here dithering on the front porch of my cabin. Should I stay or should I go? Middle of the afternoon, scanning the sky with a look of consternation on my face. Consternation is appropriate. The air is hazy. There are helicopters and small planes buzzing around overhead. An atmosphere of, let us call it, urgency has rapidly developed, as described in the following account. After lunch, I went over to the general store to get me some dessert. While I was there, 3 Albany County Sheriff's Department cars came racing into the parking area and scorched to a halt, spraying gravel and raising a cloud of dirt, a development that, in the context of my recently having read the cafe menu front to back for entertainment, was spectacularly exciting. I hung around to see what might happen next, unwrapped my Butterfinger, took a bite, watching. Deputies were here with the urgent news that rapidly approaching from over the foothills across the road, quite visible from where I stood, was an impressive column of smoke. And thus begins the story of the forest fire, from which, in that chapter, I can't decide whether to run or what I ought to do, to stay or to go, which I think is a dilemma that faces a lot of us.
And that's a kind of beneath the surface metaphoric meaning that stayed with me anyway. If this were a magazine article or a newspaper article, and you were reading about a forest fire, fine, it's factual. But there's something about, in this case, in your writing, about the forest fire representing something much deeper, something existential, that reflects not only on Shakespeare, but it reminds me of Nietzsche too. And so take a second and tell us why Nietzsche is important. Nietzsche comes up several times in the book. I don't think that's an accident. I don't know how many listeners are familiar with him, his philosophies, but go ahead and talk about that for a minute. Why does he come up? His name come up throughout the book?
It was a little bit of a coincidence that when I got back from the Grand Canyon and went up to write in Wyoming, that I carried with me a volume of Nietzsche, simply because a colleague had told me that that I should read some Nietzsche that summer. So I had the book with me, and I was determined I was going to porch sit on the cabin and read, and then the rest of the time I was going to write. And immediately, uh, and I'm no Nietzsche, obviously no Nietzsche expert, but I was captured by the notion of the abyss, and also I guess his pragmatism, if that's the right word. I think he's very clear-eyed, and I was immediately drawn into his philosophy. But I particularly liked the image of the abyss, and it felt very apt, just because standing at the edge of the Grand Canyon, taking that all in, taking in the strata and taking in kind of the meaning of the text of the canyon, and the time that's represented there, the geological time that's represented there. It's standing on the edge of an abyss. There's something so thrilling about standing there and gazing into the canyon. And so when Nietzsche writes about staring into the abyss, to me that was the two of them were kind of fused together in my mind. The canyon as having been life-changing for its beauty and its vastness and its indifference, and the abyss. And you're right, the theme is throughout the book, including in the catacombs, where there's a literal abyss on either side when we take the tour. Um, I just found that Nietzsche resonated at that level, and also in his appreciation for digression, his sense that digression is really sort of the soul of finding meaning. So
I happen to like digression. Some people, some readers don't. I happen to like digression. But it's this concept of the metaphor of a death that permeates the book. That's very powerful for me because, um, whether we like it or not, in my opinion, um, nature is indifferent. As Hemingway once said, it kills the good and bad alike. And what I found profound about the book, among other things, is you're dealing with the concept of death, either through Nietzsche or through your own interpretation or through the reader's interpretation. But when you use symbols like Grand Canyon, fire, tornadoes, um, perilous climbing, the catacombs lined with skulls, it's the death metaphor that permeates every page of the book. And not always in a bad way. In fact, on the contrary, I found it to be very uh, encouraging and empowering in a way, because we're all going to die. And one of the things I loved about the book is your implied, sometimes explicitly, but most of the time implicitly, your implied fearlessness coming to realize by the end of the book that it doesn't matter. That while we're here, we make the best of it, and then, as Macbeth said in Shakespeare's play, um, uh, we're full. It's all full of sound and fury, but in the end, it doesn't matter. So I found that to be extremely, extremely comforting, appealing. And my question to you is, Nietzsche aside, was that consciously one of the things that you were getting at?
oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes. I guess since I was young, I've had kind of a fascination with death, and I don't mean in a morbid way at all. Just how
Right.
difficult it is to grapple with our finitude, I suppose, or mortality. I think it's really interesting. It's one of the most it is the interesting thing about being human, is that we can only contemplate it while we're alive, and we're only alive for a very, very minuscule flash of time.
Mhm.
Um, and so I always felt, since I was very young, that it was important to kind of take that into account, that we're finite, and to think about it and take it in and realize it, and to the best of our ability internalize it so that it doesn't drive us. Nonetheless, that has not helped me with my various anxieties. When I see a tornado, or for example a mean cat, my heart still starts to flutter, and I still get kind of freaked out. And that's part of the book. That's the comedic tension in the book, is that I'm deliberately looking at death and mortality through the entire book, and yet I'm telling story after story of times when I completely overreacted and I thought that this was the end of the world, and it turned out not to be. And then, boy, didn't I feel foolish when something didn't happen.
Well, I think that's one of the the techniques in the book that works, and that is, and this is again very Shakespearean, dealing with an important and on the face of it uncomfortable topic like mortality and death, and dealing with it in a way that eases the sadness about it. So when you're when you're being comedic and being frivolous, lighthearted, in a very appealing way, at the same time, and that's a 10% above the surface. At the same time, it's the same iceberg, 90% below the surface, that is really is what's powerful. And I can't stress that enough. So I think it's brilliant in how you do that in such a brief period of time. I can't emphasize that enough. I think it's brilliant. And I do have, if you want to respond to that, fine. But I have another question about well, I'm telling you, books are my life, and 99% of the books I read I forget about 5 minutes after I read them, but not yours. All right, chapter 1 evokes, I'm reading from my notes, bear with me. Okay, this chapter evokes the ominous feeling of summer 2020, when it seemed that, in addition to the COVID business and the social, the lockdown stuff, it seemed like the entire western United States was burning, literally and figuratively. You touch on the effects of climate change indirectly and lightly throughout the book, but you don't really mention it per se in this first chapter. But you touch on it. You touch on climate change indirectly. So what is it? Do you have anything to say at this point about your implied reference to climate change, or is that a non-issue?
I think it's been an interesting several years here in the West to with the beetle kill encroaching and some of the effects of shifts in the climate. But wildfires have become, and there's always been wildfires, they become increasingly common. And it's partly that they are interacting, just like with wildlife is interacting more with human beings because human beings are encroaching on the wilds more and more. But I've been aware, even in the things that my husband and I just like to kind of take off and drive around the state. It's so gorgeous here, and up in Wyoming and Utah, you can get anywhere from Denver, and any number of completely different spaces and different landscapes. But how often we've started to encounter fires when we drive around. So it's been past 4 or 5 years when it's been difficult to drive somewhere in the summer or just to go visit someplace without either detouring from a fire or running into one. I think that's been true of our trips to Northern California as well, to see kids and grandkids, that we're always aware of a nearby fire and smelling the fire and avoiding a fire. So I didn't want any part of this book. And climate change, unfortunately, those words have become code words and those things become politicized very quickly. So I wasn't interested in the book being about current events in that way. I was much more interested in maybe taking a longer view of what it is to be alive. But it's hard to avoid also the things of our time that are impacting our quality of life. And whether it's climate change or you want to just say, gee, there's a lot of wildfires out there. It's become a part of life. And anybody who was in Colorado last summer or California or any of the places that were burning down suffered through weeks and weeks of this pall of thick smoke. So yes, it's in there because it's happening and it's current, but it's not in there to specifically say, oh, and climate change.
Yeah, well, I'm glad to hear you say that, because you're right. It's become a kind of a code term and politicized. I saw it as, and you talk about earthquakes later on, um, and other potential disasters. And I saw all of those again as, maybe this is just my way of reading, but I saw them as metaphors for, for danger, just the way.
Gary, you just froze. I'm going to try logging on again because I don't know if I froze too. So let
You
me
froze
try.
for a minute.
Oh, okay.
Now,
Let me see if you're back. Hold on.
okay.
No, I can't. Hold on. There you are. Okay. Sorry,
Are we
folks.
good?
Looks like
Are we
it.
good? All right.
Yes,
Okay.
I think we're
So
back.
what?
You were saying.
Okay. Well, let's move on to. You want to read an excerpt from chapter 3, Fraidy Cat, and my cat is waiting to hear what you have to say about the feline world.
I just want
So,
to say your cat's going to agree with me about this cat. When your cat
well, we'll
hears the
see.
story. Okay.
Well, we'll
Uh,
see. As I said, if she doesn't cough up a hairball, okay, then
okay.
we're with you. All right.
I was told that it was okay to drink beer, so I have a non-alcoholic beer here.
We
Run
believe
Wild.
you. We believe you.
All right, so here we go. This is from Fraidy Cat Chapter 3. I start on about page 38. And this is not, I'm not going to start reading it. I'll give you a little bit of background. So I'm in my 20s and my early 30s. I was habitually broke. That was the normal condition of everybody in the profession. And I usually held some combination of jobs. So in this chapter called Fraidy Cat, I have agreed to house sit a gorgeous home in an isolated canyon west of Boulder, Colorado. Leni Vega is a character that appears in this reading, and her husband Raul, and they're the homeowners, and their cat, their kitten, is Luca, for whom I will be responsible while they are away. So in this scene, I've just met him, the kitten, and he's already scared the bejesus out of me, and he's made it perfectly clear that he hates my guts. So this scene begins as the Vegas are in their car driving away from the house. They're gone for 2 weeks, and I'm in charge. He will try to get out the door, Leni had warned me. Do not let him. He'll get lost or eaten. There's wildlife all over the place. He won't have a chance. As I was coming back inside, he not only tried but succeeded, flying past my ankles before I could block him. The rest of the afternoon was spent as follows. I called Luca's name. This was as productive as it had been earlier when Leni had done it. I scanned the exterior of the house. I went down the hill and checked between rocks, behind trees. I called his name. I put his food and water in front of the door from which he'd escaped. I walked down the road. I called his name. I could not believe I had lost the Vegas kitten within 30 seconds of their departure. Around me were hundreds of thousands of acres and more of wilderness stretching in all directions, unbounded. A kitten could be anywhere. He was, thankfully, in a tool shed 20 yards from the house under a bench. He was okay. I had him. Now all I had to do was pick him up and get him into the house. 3 hours later, I felt like Foreman at the end of his notorious 74 rumble in the jungle with Ali, defeated, humiliated, and a bit melancholy. All exposed skin was sunburned. My arms, shins, and calves, and the tops of my feet in their flimsy sandals were not shredded. Shredded would be hyperbolic, but significantly lacerated. I had not written any plays. Instead, with the kitten temporarily shut inside the shed, I had hunted around for resources, coming across a cache of cardboard booze cartons in the basement storage room. These I had deconstructed and flattened, duct taping them together into a flexible 2 by 6 foot wall that I used to corral scaredy claws. It improved my state of mind to silently mock him when he ventured from his lair, lured by a dead bug I'd found and tied to a length of dental floss. My lower extremities were sheathed in protective newspaper, wrapped and fastened, also with duct tape, improvised gaiters. On each hand, I wore a grill mitt. I'd envisioned lifting feral cactus gently but firmly in both mitts and transporting him to and through the side door of the house. Once inside, I would kick the door closed before letting him go. I had everything prepared. He was trapped. The door to the house was propped open, and all I had to do was get him through it. But my gear, I shall refer to the outfit I've described as gear, made it impossible to execute the swift, painless, and efficient move I had pictured in my mind. I couldn't seem to keep the corral braced while simultaneously positioning myself to extricate the target using both hands. As anyone who is trained for this scenario knows, one hand wearing a grill mitt cannot pick up a kitten. It occurred to me that I could inch the entire corral kitten situation southward to the threshold. I then opened the one side so that Jabberwock could discharge directly into the house. Phew, I thought, because I had no idea. We'll end there. And Gary's gone. I don't even know if I'm gone. Should I start too? Am I still here? I can. I'm here. Okay, thank you. So I can use this moment to tell you to get a copy, push the little green button at the bottom of the screen, use code EVENTS to get your copy of The End of the World Notwithstanding, Stories I Live to Tell. Still waiting for Gary to come back. I could interview myself, or I could take questions from the audience. Did I come up with the title before the book was done? Thank you, Kay. I did not come up with the title before the book was done. Although I think I had it in the back of my mind. It was, I had written a journal when I got back from Hawaii, and this is a story in the book. That when I was on a trip to Hawaii, just having a wonderful time, visiting my cousin. My cousin had mentioned centipedes, and she freaked me out with it because she started like looking at the ceiling and asking us if we checked our shoes and everything. So I journaled on that trip because I journal every time I travel, and I journaled about the centipedes and about how after that moment, every time walking around Hawaii, I was always watching for these. She described them as being quite long and moving really fast. And so my journal I titled Centipedes Notwithstanding, because I wanted to draw attention to the fact that Hawaii was still beautiful, Oahu was still gorgeous, Haleiwa was still paradise, in spite of the centipedes. So in a way, yeah, and in a way, no. The end of the world came to me as I was finishing the book. Anybody else? Questions from the audience while we're waiting for Gary to come back? Or is there something else that I can do here? I could move on, I suppose, and read another selection. Okay, will do. Thank you. I'm going to skip to, let's see, I'll go to a chapter called Petrified. If you see my eyes flipping up, it's because I'm not reading from the book. I've obviously got this on my screen. It's always trying to figure out what works better, reading from the page or reading from the computer. So I found it. This is from chapter 10. Petrified is the name of the chapter, or the title of the chapter. And in this chapter, I am in Marseille visiting my friend Marie Do. Marie Do and I are going on a hike in the Calanque. Those are the mountains not too far from Marseille that border right on the Mediterranean Sea. And here we've begun our hike. Beneath an overhang, a trough had once been cut into the earth and lined with stone. It collected water, which trickled from a small arched opening and which looked foul. So I was surprised to hear the part that it had played in the region's ethnic, cultural, and political history. When anyone explains something to me in French at a normal rate of speech, I understand every other word or phrase and make up what might reasonably come between. Thanks to my hearing loss, I'm deaf in one ear, I'm adept at making sense out of a porous sequence such as, once upon a time, daughter, drink, happily ever after. I gathered from Marie Do that this...
Okay, I'm here now. Yeah.
Gary's back.
Right.
Gary?
Right. Thanks, bye.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, I'm now in the middle of reading another selection.
Okay.
So I'm going to keep going.
And what are you reading now?
I'm reading from Petrified, where I'm on the
Okay.
hike with Marido.
Okay.
Okay. So I gathered from Marido that the Fontaine de Voir, was a place with legendary and historical significance having to do with the marriage millennia ago of an Ionian boy and an indigenous girl. The Phocians, or Greeks, landed in Segobrigian County just as the Segobrigian princess was choosing a mate, which ritual selection she would effect by offering water from this very spring to the lucky guy. She had chosen Protus, one of the Greeks, marking the happy union of the Phocian and Segobrigian cultures and the founding of Massalia or Marseille. All that I caught, but I had to request that we switch to English anyway, as I could have sworn there was also something in there about golf, gypsies, and a vacuum cleaner. Not long after we passed the Fontaine, we came to a cave. Its black maw terrifying and irresistible. Had this geological feature been located anywhere near my hometown, its entrance would have been strewn with the detritus of delinquency, experimentation, and indulgence. The charred remains of illegal campfires, crushed beer cans, the butts of joints and filtered cigarettes, and of course used condoms and their empty wrappers. But unlike my compatriots, the French did not tend to sneak and lie their way through post-adolescence, slyly or guiltily concealing their smoking, toking, drinking, and groping. Au contraire, such pleasures are considered to be natural and do not have to play out in the back seats of cars, in basements, abandoned structures, or dark, creepy holes. Theirs is, I would argue, a healthy approach to growing up, although one wonders if French teens, shrugging off as banal the juvenile behaviors of Americans, see as transgressive, the juvenile behaviors Americans see as transgressive, might miss out on the thrill of getting away with stuff. At any rate, there was not a welcome mat of litter here, just damp earth, rivulets, and a few fallen sticks and branches. I made my way over them all to peek within. When I was a couple of feet inside the opening, I thought I heard a faint but resonant snort from the unseen recesses. It ought to have crossed my mind, but had not, that mammals of a certain size and temperament are known to occupy caves. I didn't want to enliven our expedition this early on with my qualms, which in any case were likely to become more, not less pronounced as the day went on, so I just backed out and quickly, I would even say nimbly, for me, rejoined Marido where she waited. For once it was I who vigorously assumed the lead. Nothing to be worried about there at all, I reassured my friend, though she hadn't asked, as I sprinted ahead.
Yeah, this chapter is exactly what I've been saying for this last almost hour about the power, the lasting power of the prose. How you seem to be saying one thing, but you're really saying something else thematically. And this is one more example of that power of the metaphor. I can't stress that enough. It's what, in my opinion, is going to make this book uh, stay in print for a long time. I really see. I teach English literature, as you know. I see this in university English classes because of the power of the metaphor. I can't stress that enough. I do have. It's great writing. I have to say it's terrific writing. I wish I could write like that. And I don't say
Right.
that glibly. Yeah. Um,
I think you
and
do
we're on
write like
the,
that.
oh, thanks. I appreciate that. So metaphorically, then, what are you saying about the beasts, the snarling animals that lurk in the shadows of our lives? What are you saying? In other words, to me, um, the power of metaphor is telling us something about ourselves, about our lives. And this is one chapter that does that in an exemplary way. So, what is it you're telling us about the unseen snarling beasts about ourselves? You're on.
Well, I mean, you just actually said it when you said the snarling beast about ourselves, because I do feel like that beast is, and throughout the entire book, the beast is in me clearly. The things that I'm terrified of and afraid of are as much inside my own imagination as they exist in the world. And but I also think that that theme of the abyss recurs here when looking into a dark cave or anything. Again, Nietzsche says when you stare into the abyss stares back. Very similar to looking into a dark cave where you're curious. I mean, the book is about curiosity very much. It's about the pleasure of being curious and the fearlessness that curiosity imbues us with, I believe. But at the same time, you look into dark places or you look into the abyss, and the abyss might snort back at you or stare back. Um, and I do agree that the theme is throughout the book, including in the character of Oscar, who is a schizophrenic man who lives in our back alley and who recurs throughout the book, or who reappears. He's haunted himself by his own beasts, and clearly clearly is has those monsters inside of him constantly, and is constantly addressing them. But then he also advances on me, and there's one moment at the end of the book where we have an exchange with each other, and the beast is more or less neutralized at that moment, just as I feel like ultimately it is by the end of the book. I feel like the abyss still exists, the sense of the abyss and the beast snarling in the shadows, but nonetheless there are ways. You pointed out at the end that I say nothing matters, but I also have another message, which is that every moment and the relationships that we share matter very much. So yes, I don't know if that's responsive to what you were asking.
Can you hear me? Can you
Yes.
hear me?
Yes. Can you hear
Okay,
me?
good, thank you. I can hear you fine.
I don't know if anybody else can hear us. We could just be here
Okay.
talking to each other, but
Well, there's a little tab that says tap to unmute sound. Do you think I should click on that?
no, okay, everybody can hear us. Larry's just
Everybody
weighed
can
in.
hear?
Yeah.
Okay.
Should we go to
All right.
audience questions, do you think?
Say that again?
Should we go to audience questions, do you think?
I'm ready if you are. We have 10 minutes left. Do we have
Okay,
any questions?
or go on with your next thing. I don't know exactly
We can
what
hear
we
you.
can
Okay.
do or what we should do in 10 minutes.
Well, before we go to audience questions, I've got a couple of generic questions, okay?
Yeah.
I don't know how many audience questions we have yet. But let me ask you a couple of generic questions that I've jotted down. Bear with me a second. And I will let you know what Babs thinks of your chapter 3.
Thank you.
Okay, here. Now, here's my first question. We know you've done a lot of traveling. You said that, but you seem to have a soft spot in your heart for Wyoming, right? That's where
Yes.
you're from. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, what is it about Wyoming besides family? I guess I suppose family. But what is it about the Wyoming that your roots that you keep going back to?
I've had a very weird transformation over the years. When I was growing up, I really felt like I was on the wrong planet. I grew up in the middle of Wyoming, was born in Sheridan, grew up in Casper, and I just felt like such a city kid. You know, I would watch. You grew up in Chicago, and I always imagined growing up someplace like Chicago with the city around and people and noise, and we were kind of. I used to say in the middle of nowhere, but now I have a completely different appreciation for the what used to be called nowhere in my mind. My grandparents had come there, Norwegian and Danish immigrants had come there a couple of generations before, and so I felt at times like I was stuck, and I couldn't wait to get out. So as soon as I could, I cut loose and I left Wyoming, and I traveled and traveled and traveled. It wasn't until I think I was maybe 2 or 3 decades later, and I started to go back, and I deeply appreciated, first of all, the education that I got there. Casper was a wonderful town to grow up in, and the expanse, the prairie everywhere, and the mountains and the geography just left so much room for the imagination that I didn't appreciate it when I was a kid. But when I went back, I was like, wow, I was really well schooled, and I was free to traipse all over the place and just explore the world. And my imagination was just unfettered growing up there. But the other thing is, I got this appreciation for geology. I don't know why, but I suddenly realized that that I grew up in the middle of this landscape that is just amazing. It is a record of time that I had failed to appreciate. So every time I go back, I look at I see the antelope and I see all the tumbleweeds and the stuff that I grew up with and expect, and the huge sky. And now it feels like going home, and I'm going home to some place I'm really proud to have grown up in, and that I just love. I could go back there endlessly and explore places that when I was growing up, I thought were kind of ho hum. The mountains, Thermopolis, the rock formations everywhere. Just I can't get enough.
And of course, your dad has a great first name too.
Gary, which is one of the best names.
It is one of
Uh,
the best names, right? There aren't enough of us. If you could take all of us on anywhere in the world where you've been before, where would you show us around and why?
so many places, and I don't know why I got like a deer in the headlights with this, just because the world is it just refreshes itself constantly for me. So I want to go back to every place that I've been pretty much and see it again through fresh eyes. It's like reading a book when you're 15 and then reading it again when you're 20 and then again when you're 50. The world is just so continually refreshing. But I will say that I went on a trip to Norway. Um, and if for those who have not been there from Oslo all the way up, I would go back and I would want to explore all the way up to the Arctic Circle and inland and the fjords. And there's something about it that's so breathtakingly gorgeous to me. But I think I would feel that way about so many places. The world is an amazing place.
Have you been to Europe at all besides Norway? I
Yeah,
don't think I.
well, France
Oh, of course,
briefly.
France. Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Been through. I've been to Prague. I've been to London, and then Denmark, and up into Norway. But a lot of my travels have been actually as a theater person, as an actor traveling around the United States. So I've done a lot of that. I've
Well,
done almost
speaking of
every city.
which,
Yeah.
yeah, speaking of which, okay, so you're a playwright, and now you're a book writer. Um, it's I would almost call it a novel because to me it hasn't the power of a great novel. I know you consider it a memoir, but maybe it's both. Um, all right, so what do you like better? Do you prefer writing the screenplays or I mean not screenplays but play scripts, or you prefer book writing?
I love them both. I'm a writer at heart, but what I love about plays is working with a great ensemble and seeing the material transform. When it's meant to be spoken, it's meant to be breathed and embodied, and it's so amazing to hand over a piece that you've written and see in the hands of competent actors and a competent director, just feel that collaborative creativity happen. And so that to me is unparalleled. But I wrote a novel. Nothing has happened with the novel, but then this book got published. Thank you again, Traveler's Tales. Um, and I've loved all the processes of both so much. I'm going to keep writing, and I might even keep writing travel books after this, just because it was
Well,
so fun.
yeah.
And
Well,
you're a
we have a
travel
terrific
writer.
pub.
Oh,
Yeah, I was going to say we have a terrific publisher, Traveler's Tales. They're a gem. Believe me, you got lucky, as did I, because they're really great people, and they have great writers, and it's a nice team. Are you going to continue to act though, or
probably
you have
not. No, I don't think
no?
so. I think those days are over. Um, I did. It doesn't look like we have time. I wanted to talk to you about being a rotten person, but it looks to me like we only have a couple minutes, or we're gone.
But before we do that, I also want to thank Barbara's Bookstore because they do a great job. I frequent
Thank you,
Barbara's
Barbara's Bookstore.
Bookstore. Yeah, I live 10 minutes away from my local Barbara's Bookstore, and I'm one of their best customers. It's a great place. All right, so now let's get some questions answered. Do you want to handle that? Do you want to field those?
I don't know. We've got 1 minute left. Let's see. Ask a question. Writing process. I roll out of bed, Laura, and I start writing as soon as I can. I get a cup of coffee and I'll write all day long if I can. But when I travel, I just have a journal with me, and whenever we sit down for a break, I'll pull out the journal and write. So when I have the time, I'll write first thing in the morning.
Did you come up with the title before the book was done? That's the next question.
And Kay asked me that one while you had disappeared off into the ether and were
Yes.
communing with the gods somewhere else. We talked about that.
I was talking to my cat.
Oh, I knew that you were doing something important.
Okay. All right, did you feel this question? Your book is very funny, but also contains some very dark experiences that you interweave with the lightness. Did you find that challenging, or did it come naturally to you because of your theater background?
I'll just say that by the time that I was telling these stories, I had there was nothing really to process in them, so they were all a joy to tell. I was ready to tell them, and they didn't feel dark to me at the time. And I realize they are for the reader in some ways, and can be. But for me, yeah, probably because this was a solo piece first, and I was performing it for a long time. But also, by the time I'm telling a story like that, it doesn't have the same charge for me. So to me, it was enjoyable to write about the dark and the light, and like balancing both of those.
Well, I can only tell you that this book was it's a great book, and as I said before, it lives beyond the last page, and you're going to do great with it. You're a great writer, and keep it up, write more. And
thank you. You
again,
too, please, because I'm almost done with your book, and I really would like more. So.
Okay, I'll do my best. All right. Meanwhile, after we're done. Our mics are still gonna be hot, so watch your language.
Okay, I'll be careful.
All right, be careful.
Yeah, thank you, everybody, for being here.
Thanks, Laura. Yeah, thanks,
Thanks,
Kay.
Laura.
Thanks, Laura. Thanks, Barbara.
Thanks, Gary. Thanks, Barbara.
Thanks, Janna. Yeah, and thanks, Babs. Thanks, Babs. Thank you, Babs.